As creatives, as witches, as anyone who has a unique skill set, we probably all know that feeling that we are illegitimate, that we don't know enough, that we aren't good enough, that we really aren't valid in whatever we do. You know, whether we are healers, nerds, witches, creative people, writers, it is an issue that we all struggle with, imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome, especially in industries or in areas where certifications aren't necessary and the skill sets are very, very unique, is a huge issue that people struggle with. And today I want to talk to you about how you can clarify what your own criteria for legitimacy are, how you can handle toxic comparison, and also how you can uplift yourself in order to feel more legitimate and feel better about yourself. As a first pointer, I want to say real quick and preface this by saying that don't become a gatekeeper and don't let gatekeepers influence you too much. If you don't know what a gatekeeper is, it is someone who tells someone else that they are illegitimate because they aren't fulfilling some basically arbitrary criteria. For example, if you are a nerd and you haven't watched Star Wars, other nerds will tell you you're not a real nerd. Or if you're a witch, you don't have crystals, you don't work with crystals, some might say that you aren't a real witch. If you're a healer and you aren't completely perfect, have not solved all of your issues, then you're not a good healer. Or another example would be that as a creative person, as a writer, you have to be published officially in order to be legitimate and get that arbitrary legitimacy from an outside source, essentially. So seeing yourself as a fake, seeing yourself as a fraud, asking yourself, am I a real witch? Am I a real writer? If I don't do da-da-da-da-da, that is the essence of this video and how we can take steps to battle that. This was, by the way, inspired by one of my patrons asking a question in my Ask Me for Advice special over on Patreon, so I appreciate the inspiration. Now, first of all, I want to talk about finding out what your own criteria are for legitimacy and for being valid in whatever you do. Now, this has a little bit to do with toxic comparison, but I will talk about that in the second point more. For now, we will focus on what your criteria are, and the exercise that I suggest here is that you write or think up a perfect, legitimate, entirely valid version of yourself. Someone who checks all of the boxes, someone who is incredibly respected or whatever is important to you. Maybe you want to be feared by people. All of these things go into that persona that is so legitimate that nobody could question them. Nobody. And what this is going to do is to help you identify what your own very high standards for legitimacy are, for that perceived legitimacy. And you can also start acknowledging that there's probably nobody who really meets those requirements that you have. And what can also help is if there's a person online or a person in your life that you feel a little bit shadowy about, it kind of bothers you that they are very successful, do take that person into consideration and consider what abilities they have or what skills they have, which boxes they check and you don't, and kind of take that into consideration as well. Or also compare your crazy version, your crazy legitimate version with that person and see how legitimate they really are if you have such a high standard. If you applied the high standard that you have towards yourself to be legitimate to someone else, then see how that is going to work out, how legitimate they are at the end of that. The second thing I want to talk about is related to toxic comparison. And this is reminding yourself of the myriad differences between you and the other people that you're comparing yourself to. And I think this is something that doesn't nearly get enough attention in our society, because how can we even compare ourselves to anyone? There are so many tiny differences. For example, do they have a car and you don't? Well, You have to walk everywhere, you get your workout in, and they have a completely different time schedule from you. They get things done way quicker than you. You know, even minor differences that we don't even know about. I couldn't tell you whether the people I follow on Instagram have a car or not, but it's kind of important because it influences your time planning. Do they have kids? That's another big question. Do you have kids? Do they live in a huge city with a strong community and they have 1 billion followers? Do you live in a small town where you basically have no physical contacts who would follow you on social media? You know what I mean? Especially if you own a witchy business. Another thing, are you maybe a very locally rooted witch or a local healer who has a strong community around them but doesn't do anything online? But then you see someone online who is also a healer and they may have no local community whatsoever. They only have their online followers, but you think, why do they have more followers than me? I want that too. You know what I mean? So it doesn't pay tribute and acknowledge the fact that they have a completely different life from you. And then another thing that I feel a lot of people compare themselves to is if you are a private witch, a private mystic, a private spiritual person, and you compare yourself to someone who has a business, who posts on Instagram every day, who makes YouTube videos like I do as well, then that's not fair to you because you have your very valid and very strong own private practice that has nothing to do with a business or with representing something outside of yourself. So take into consideration all of these aspects, their living situation, you know, kids, no kids, and you can't even take these into consideration because you don't know that about people. And that is very important. Remember that you basically only know 1% of anyone you see online. You don't know them very well as a person. You don't know their life very well. And the last thing I want to say about toxic comparison here is think about whether you would actually want those things. Because some people are like, I wish I had 3,000 Instagram followers. But then they think about, do I actually want to post every day? Do I want to go through the trouble of being on Instagram 2 hours or more a day in order to achieve this? Probably not if you are not a very online person, a social media person. So be realistic about what you actually want and what you can achieve with it. And just because you don't post on Instagram every day, that doesn't make you invalid either. It just means that you have different priorities and a different focus. Another thing, though, about toxic comparison, beware of using it as an excuse. Because, you know, the goal is to find your own agency and to empower yourself and remember all the things that you have, rather than saying that person doesn't have kids, that's why their business is going better, or that person doesn't live with their parents so they can practice witchcraft at home, or any of those excuses. You know, we don't really want to fall into that too much. Of course, it is good to acknowledge that, but do think about what you have, what abilities you have, what agency you have, and how you can expand yourself even within the limits of what you're working with, basically. Now, the third suggestion, the big suggestion against imposter syndrome that I have is to give yourself some credit and use that to figure out what your why is. So first of all, write down all of the achievements that you have had in the past year or maybe in all of your life, whatever you feel like. The thing with this is you may need a friend to help you out because we tend to forget all of the amazing things we do, all of the house moving that we do, the gym routines that we establish, the books we read. You know, to some people it's not a big deal to read a book, but to some of us, we struggle with reading. So reading a book is an achievement. And don't invalidate it by saying, well, it's no big deal to other people, so it's not an achievement. That's not how it works. If you struggle with something and you conquer it, that is an achievement, and you can put it on that list. Even if you have, like, you know, studying progress with tarot or getting a certificate or taking a course that will help you become more of who you are and step into your power. All of those are achievements. All of those are signals that you are ready and that you are changing your life and that you have power. So give yourself credit for those. and derive some legitimacy from them by asking yourself, why did I do those things? Why am I still doing those things? And in that way, you kind of get on track with your own unique purpose, with what it really means to be you and why you do the things you do, rooted in your own story. So asking yourself why you did those things and why you're still working on yourself kind of helps you figure out what you bring to the table and what your purpose is. And that gives you a lot of legitimacy, because purpose is legitimacy. At least that is something that we can work towards. You know, legitimacy isn't the things you have. Sometimes it's not even the things you do or don't do, but it's the purpose you have and working on that purpose. Because anything that you bring into the world and that it is your task to bring into the world is a valid endeavor, is legitimate. The fourth suggestion is probably something that especially pertains to business owners, but it can also be private people, which is to make a review or feedback folder for yourself from all the client feedback you have, feedback from friends, maybe even feedback from your boss. Anything that can kind of trace back to the thing that you feel illegitimate about, that maybe you feel illegitimate as a writer, as a witch. So try and see whether you can get some quotes from people that give you validity and that show that you help people and that you inspire people with what you do. And then when you have that folder together on your phone, preferably, that's how I do it, you can look at that whenever you feel like you are not legitimate, like you're not valid. And one thing that Kellyanne Maddox said that I really liked is really ignoring the reviews that people give you, ignoring the good that you do and that they tell you about, is a little bit disrespectful. You know, it kind of invalidates their words. So why is it fair that you completely ignore your feedback in order to make yourself feel bad and tell yourself you're illegitimate, rather than respecting their opinion and thinking, maybe it's true, maybe I am good, maybe I am helping people, you know what I mean? And if you don't have a lot of reviews like that, you can ask people in your life to maybe write down something about you, or ask them like, what do you like about me? And then kind of gather up information about your skills, about what you're good at, even if you don't have a business. And then lastly, the fifth thing I want to say is to create affirmations for yourself. Basically, create affirmations that cater to your specific issue. And I wrote down some of them. You will have to figure out why you feel illegitimate, what your criteria are, and based on that, you can very well create these affirmations. So for example, one of them could be, I deserve this. My story is worth telling. I deserve to be heard. My magic is mine alone. I have something meaningful to say. Or my witchcraft practice is legitimate. Something as simple as that can also help you. Now, I'm going to link some other videos about easy witchcraft practices below as well, and I want to thank my patrons for inspiring this video and for supporting me. If you want to support me as well, I will put the link down there. And let me know in the comments how you make yourself feel legitimate. Like how do you help yourself? For me, that client feedback folder is like the most important thing. And also Patreon itself, because it does help me feel more legitimate, and it kind of contributes to me feeling like I am doing good in the world and it is seen, it is actually valued, which is a good feeling. All right, that is all I have. I wish you the greatest of days, the greatest of weeks, and I will see you very, very soon.